I'm Nancy Bronstein, and today I'm going to show you one way to load your quilt onto a 12-foot frame. One would think that there would only be one way to do it. However, just like in most things in quilting, there are personal preferences and different ways of doing the loading, and part of it is personal preference, and part of it is the type of quilting that you want to do on that quilt. Certain styles of loading have an impact as you move along to make your quilt. Today I'm going to show you the standard version of loading the quilt frame. There's also a clear view style, there's a burrito style, there's probably other styles that have other names, but today I'm just going to show you the standard version. Before we get started loading the quilt, I wanted to mention that I will always set mine up so that I have 4 to 5 inches of batting on either side with 4 to 5 inches of the backing fabric for a few reasons. Number one, I like to use rulers, and I feel like I can do better on the edges if I have that sort of platform, so to speak, on either side. Two, I will often change my idea of how I want to quilt something on the fly. And this way I've got built-in scrap fabric on the side that I can test that idea out on. And three, I think it's a really good idea to always check your stitches whenever you change the thread. It's kind of like if you go on vacation and you leave your teenagers at home, you could have a big mess when you get back to clean up. When I first loaded my quilt, my very first quilt on this frame, I changed the thread and I did the whole that area of the quilt from left to right, and I had not put the thread securely through the tension discs. It was one big mess on the underside that I had to pick the whole thing out. So whenever you change your threads, just do a little doodle on the side and make sure that your stitches look good on top and on the bottom. Then when I'm all done with the quilt, there'll be big areas where I haven't done anything with that extra fabric on the sides. So I'll take the batting, cut it off, and I take the batting and cut it into strips, and with some muslin I make my own pillow forms, and the backing fabric I can put into a scrap quilt. So it doesn't go to waste, and it's well worth the convenience, I think. I'm now going to demo how to load a quilt in a standard method. There are other methods. There's a clear view method. I think there's one called burrito, and I certainly would use a different method than this if I were, say, going to load a Dream Big panel, because when I quilted that, I started in the middle, so I would load it in a different fashion. Now, today I'm going to be loading a baby quilt that I made relatively quickly, and show you how you would load a quilt with a standard method. So you want, first of all, to have your fabrics cascading in to each other. Like there's what they call a waterfall here. It's falling this way. Maybe bring the camera over. So the belly bar leader is cascading inside, and this leader is also they're kind of kissing, so to speak. So you have your leaders cascading into each other, and you're going to find the middle part of your fabric here. And either put a pin in it or mark it in some way. So I'm marking the opposite end in the middle of the backing fabric as well, so that when I go to attach it at the top, I can match it up to the middle of that leader. You're going to find the mark. Well, you're going to first of all take the leader from the belly bar and pull it up. Find the mark that's the center of this leader and pin these together, the two middle marks. And you want your backing fabric to be wrong side up, because this is the bottom layer of the quilt sandwich we will be forming. So I'm going to put my first pin in there. And it's best to use these extra long pins. I'm going to pin from the middle out to the left and then to the right. When I go to the left, I'm going to have my the point of my pin facing this way. When I go to the right, I'm going to have it facing that way, because I tend to smooth out from the middle out, so that way I will be less likely to poke my finger on the end of the pin. And I put them in very close to each other from the middle part to the edge. So I have my backing fabric pinned to the leader, and the next step is to roll it up. Of course, in order to get the pole to roll, I need to have this released. This piece here needs to be released. Here it's locked and it won't move, and I need to release it by pushing it in, and then it moves freely. So now I'm going to roll this up, and I'm going to roll it towards me. So let's get this leader all smooth before I start. And what I have here is a 12-foot frame, but as you can see, you can do a variety of different sizes of quilts. And I'm seeing some threads and stray hairs to pull off. Now, what I want to see here when I go to roll this is that this is lined up nicely. This is straight across on the bar. It's not wonky like that. You want to make sure that everything's lined up so that your quilt bottom will be even. So I'm just going to roll that back and then continue to roll up my backing, and I'll smooth from the center. Not as important with this baby quilt as it is with a larger quilt where you get more bunching, but you want to smooth as you go. And I'm just looking for any stray threads as I go along. And now I'm seeing that seam come across the top there, and it looks pretty even, which is good. And I'm going to visually check again as it comes over here. If it were that this was kind of wonky this way, I could tighten it up or loosen over here just so I can get this pretty straight across the bar, which looks pretty good. Okay, so we've got that done. So I'm going to again find the middle, top and bottom, and make a mark. Now I have my middle marked, and it is a directional quilt in that I've got this embroidery in the middle, so this is up. So I am going to throw this over here, then bring this leader up from the middle here, and find it had been cascading down in between the two bars. I'm going to pull it up and find my middle mark here, and take my quilt top and find my mark for the middle on the quilt top and pin these together. So I've got them pinned. I'm going to pin them like this, where I'm seeing the right side of the fabric on top, and here is my leader. So I now have my quilt top pinned to the second leader here. And remember, I had the leaders cascading down the middle. As I go to advance it, I'm going to be turning the pole so it rotates in a clockwise manner. And I'm going to be smoothing as I go along. As I get to the part with the quilt top, I want to make sure this is even across here. It's not twisted. And just keep going here. Don't want any hourglassing. You want everything to be even on the ends. Now I have that all rolled up, and if I were to release these a little bit, I would again have the two fabrics cascading down in the middle, kind of kissing each other. So I have my backing wound around the belly bar and my quilt top also wound around. Now it's time to attach the backing fabric to the take-up leader. So what you want to do is take your leader and flip it around. And actually, before I flip it, just point out, I don't know if you can see, there is a bar underneath here. You want to make sure that the leader fabric goes underneath that bar. So what happens is this bar that's underneath the take-up pole will hold the quilting surface level. If you have it not underneath that pole, then it's going to be on a slant. So then I'm going to find my mark where I marked the middle of my leader when I first got my long arm, and then pull up my backing fabric, find the mark in the center of the backing fabric that I made previously, and pin those two together. Of course, with the points of the pins going out towards the sides, and about the same distance apart, very close together, from the middle out to the sides. So now I have the backing fabric pinned to the leader bar. So now it's time to put my batting down in between the quilt top and the backing to make my quilt sandwich. And I want to use a double layer of batting. This is a baby blanket, and I want it to be nice and soft and warm. So I'm going to pull off any of these extra threads hanging around and get my batting edge lined up. That's good enough. And I need to scoot it in between these layers, so I'm going to take this pole and place it up on top of the cradle for the take-up pole, just temporarily, so I can scoot this underneath here and get it lined up. Now I can put this pole back. And what I want is my 2 layers of batting to be right underneath where these pins are. And because I'm using 2 layers of batting, I'm going to go ahead and do a basting line of stitches along the top to hold the 2 layers together and even. If I didn't have 2 layers, I would just go ahead and put the quilt top on top of that, but I would rather have these 2 layers tacked down first, and then I'll baste the quilt top down. And before I baste, what I do is I change my settings to 4 stitches per inch, so that it's a nice big stitch, and which is good for batting, good for basting. I'm going to go slow and just make sure that all of the batting stays flat and where I want it to be. And because this is just a basting stitch, it's a little wobbly, it's not a big deal. but I do take my time because the 2 layers of batting do want to bubble up if I don't. Now I could also add my clamps on the side, which I neglected to do, to help hold this taut. Probably only need 1, but I'll put 2 in. The cables that come with the frame are long enough for baby blankets, as you can see. I don't have that one quite long enough though. It's a little too tight. And that's better. Let's get one over here. And that holds the pull tab more tautly in place to get a good end result. Okay, so now I'll go back to basting. Now, if you find that your batting is bubbling up a bit, what would be a good idea is to use the glide foot. The glide foot will allow it to just smoothly go across any bubbles. And it's also really good if you have joins in your quilt where there's a bump. So it's good for a lot of things. Also yarn couching. It's a very nice foot to have. So now I'm going to persevere with this ruler foot because I know I'm going to do ruler work. So I'm just going to take it slow. Okay, so I've got that tacked down. The next thing will be to position my quilt top in place so then I can baste the quilt top to the batting. So now I'm going to do the row of stitches basting down the quilt top to my batting and backing. And because I want a really straight line, I'm going to use these channel locks. And I'll show you how these work. Basically, they lock the wheels that allow the machine to go forward and back. So I just put these on here and on the other side. And now the machine will go this way, but it doesn't want to go forward and back. It'll go side to side, but it's locked in place so that I can get a nice straight line. Now I need to take them off to get everything positioned, but that's how I would position them so that I have a nice straight line. Okay, so I have pulled my quilt top up so that it's about 1 inch from my basting line and my little bit more than that from the pins. And I have placed my channel locks on the machine so that when I stitch across, I get the straight line and it will be within the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So then I can, and I also have it set on a basting stitch of 4 millimeters long, not wide. I said wide before, but I meant long. And then I'm just going to slowly go across, making sure that the fabric doesn't bubble on me, and baste this down. And if I had to, I could pull these stitches out later because they are pretty large, but it's nice if they're within the seam allowance. Another thing I noted was that the midline that I had marked of the quilt top is also lined up with the midline of the batting, and not the batting, the backing. Okay, now we got that tacked down. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the thread. I'm going to pull my quilt top up here, and by rolling it up and start quilting. So I've pulled my quilt top up and I can start quilting now, but before I change it from the basting stitch, I'm going to baste down each side. Then change it to the stitch that I usually quilt with, which is usually about 11 or 12 stitches per inch. Thanks for joining me today on how to load your quilt into the 12-foot frame. Of course, that applies to a 10-foot frame as well. And I will be making more videos on topics like how to set your tension properly, how to use our optional feet, how to do ruler work, and so on. So stay tuned.